Welcome back. Welcome to Chapter 3, and in this particular chapter we'll be discussing cells. It's a large chapter. In fact, this is the only chapter you and I will go through that is its own exam material. Second test will cover entirely Chapter 3, so we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's get started here. First, we'll have a discussion about what exactly cells are, and we're going to pick up with the idea of cell theory. And the cell theory states that the cell is the basic structural functional unit of life. The smallest thing on this planet that we would consider alive would be a single cell. All organisms and the functions of that organism depend on individual cells and cells as groups working together. All the chemistry of the cell dictates the shape and specific things that we find inside the cell, and we'll be looking as this chapter goes on at quite a number of cell types and things inside cells. And life continuing, life going on to the next generation also has a cellular basis. So we'll at least briefly touch on in this chapter the idea of how cells get copied, and then of course the idea of eggs and sperm in humans. Learning outcomes for this chapter, things that you'll know by the time we're done with this chapter would include being able to define a cell. Certainly you'll have that definition down nice and pat by the time we're done. And then another major factor that you'll be able to do at the end is list the three major regions of a generalized cell and tell what their functions are. So let's get started. Cells are actually quite diverse. There are over 200 different types of human cells in the body, and while we won't go over all 200 of those, we will learn quite a number of cells in the body. They differ in their size, their shape, what we find inside them, and what they do. They actually have quite a range of jobs. So let's look on this page at a few discrete kinds of cells. Here on the top, we see cells that are connecting body parts to each other, forming linings or transporting, especially transporting gases. And the three examples we have of this group of cells are fibroblasts, which make fibers, epithelial cells, which line openings, and red blood cells, which of course carry oxygen in the body. In the next section, we'll look at cells that move organs and move body parts around. And the two cells listed here are skeletal muscle and smooth muscle cells. In the next panel down, we see cells that store nutrients. Of course, that's a fat cell, as well as cells that fight disease. In this particular example, we've got a kind of white blood cell known as a macrophage. The next panel down shows a nerve cell, which is a cell that gathers information and helps to control bodily fluids. And the last panel at the bottom of the page is a cell of reproduction, and in particular what they've shown us here is a sperm cell. Now, if you get a little disgruntled that the author chose to show a sperm cell for the example of a cell of reproduction and not an egg cell, I'd remind you to check the authors on your textbook. They are both women. Talk to them if you got a problem with this particular picture. On to the next page, we're going to go over some of the structures of a generalized cell. Now, all cells are unique. They've also all got their own specific features about them, but in general, most cells have some basic things in common. In particular, they all have three basic parts or three basic regions, and that would be the plasma membrane. All cells in the body are surrounded by a plasma membrane. It's a flexible outer boundary, and we'll spend some time talking about what makes up that boundary. Next, we'll look at the things that's just inside the cell membrane, and that would include the cytoplasm, which is all of the interior fluid containing some structures known as organelles, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about what each of those organelles does. Finally, the nucleus is the control center of the cell. The DNA is contained here, and a lot of stuff happens in the nucleus, and we'll focus on some of that toward the end of this chapter. Now, this last slide of this introductory short video to the chapter is kind of a map of a generalized cell. And what I want to do is I want to start in the upper right-hand corner, and the big purple thing there is the nucleus. The nucleus contains DNA, and we can see some of that in here. The nucleus is wrapped in a structure called the nuclear envelope. Inside the nucleus is all this purple stuff, and this purple stuff is labeled chromatin. That actually is DNA that is unraveled at the moment. In the very center of the cell, we've got a nucleolus, and in this particular picture, it's showing up as a dark purple center, a little bit like the yolk in the middle of an egg. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It's this series of blue tubes that we see right here. And in this picture, you can see that these are smooth covered tubes, and we'll look at another set of tubes that are not so smooth in a little while. The next label down points to cytosol. That is the liquid interior, and you can sort of generally, loosely, casually think of cytosol as being the cell juice. The red structure seen here is a mitochondrion. Even though they've split the word in half, it's still a single structure. Below that, we see a lysosome. This is a bubble of membrane inside the cell that actually contains digestive enzymes, and it's used on occasion to digest things that the cell brings inside it, or occasionally even to help digest the cell itself. The next label here is centriole, and I'm going to add to that the centrosome label. Centrioles are involved in dividing the cell, and the centrosome is where we find the centrioles. Now, looking down toward the bottom left corner, we can see some fibers inside the cell. Those are all part of a larger system of tubes called the cytoskeleton, and it includes several size tubes, including microtubules and intermediate filaments. Coming on around the lower part of this picture, we see a peroxisome. That is a bubble of membrane inside the cell that contains some enzymes to help protect the cell. Coming up, we actually see two areas right here and here where some things are being ejected outside of the cell in a process we would call secretion. More specifically, this is a process called exocytosis. Coming up, we see some items labeled Golgi apparatus. It's a stack of, in this particular picture, kind of green bubbles, and those are where the cell stores useful products. The next label up shows us some red dots looking almost like sprinkles on a donut. Those red dots are ribosomes, and their main job is to make protein. Toward the top, we see rough endoplasmic reticulum. That is some of the blue tubes we saw before that were labeled smooth, but these are now rough because they have ribosomes on them. Again, this is involved in making proteins because it's got ribosomes on it. And the last item on this page that we've not yet talked about is the plasma membrane. That membrane surrounds the entire exterior of the cell, and we'll have an entire video where we talk about nothing but the plasma membrane. In fact, we'll probably have two videos where we're talking about nothing but plasma membrane, how it's built, and how things get across it. I went kind of quickly through those, and if you didn't hear all those descriptions, of course, you can just hit rewind on the video, but more importantly, this was just an introduction. We're going to go over each and every one of those items in its own turn in detail, and we'll certainly come back and visit a picture like this and these same structures several more times before we're done with this chapter. That finishes this brief introductory video. Good luck. You have a lot of studying coming up. I'll see you back online soon.